Have you ever looked at something really old and thought, wait, how did they do that? Maybe it was a massive stone structure, or an ancient tool that seemed impossibly precise, or just a mystery that didn't quite fit the timeline you learned in school. That moment, when history stops making perfect sense and you are left wondering if maybe, just maybe, there's more to the story. You are not alone in that feeling. Across cultures and centuries, humans have told stories about a time before, a golden age, a lost world, a civilization that knew things we've forgotten. It is in our myths, our religions, our collective memory. And here's the thing. What if those stories aren't just stories? What if they are echoes of something real? Now, I know this is a big question, and it is one that'll take us through some fascinating territory. We are going to explore ancient mysteries, examine scientific evidence, look at structures that shouldn't exist, and ask uncomfortable questions about what we think we know. And if you are curious about this too, if this resonates with you, a small like really does help this video find others who might be wondering the same things. We've got a long journey ahead, about an hour and a half together, and your support means this can reach more people who are ready to question the official timeline. So here's what I am inviting you to do. Get comfortable. Maybe grab some tea, find a cozy spot, put on some headphones. Because, for the next 90 minutes, we are going to dive deep into one of humanity's most enduring questions. What if the first civilization was more advanced than us? What if everything got reset, and we are not discovering the secrets of the universe for the first time? We are rediscovering them. There's no need to hurry. We are going to take our time with this, exploring 15 different angles on this mystery. We'll look at the philosophy behind cycles of civilization, the hard science of catastrophes, the myths that might be memories, and the structures that still puzzle engineers today. We'll travel beneath the waves, decode ancient mathematics, and ask what we might lose if it all happened again. This isn't about proving anything definitively. It is about staying curious, questioning our assumptions, and remembering that the more we learn about the past, the more mysteries we uncover. So, settle in. Let's wonder together. Now, before we dive into ancient stones and underwater cities, we need to talk about something bigger. Something that makes you stop and think about the whole game we are playing as a species. Let's start with an idea that's thousands of years old. In Hindu philosophy, there's this concept called yugas, these massive cycles of time where civilizations rise up, reach incredible heights, get a little too confident, maybe a little corrupt, and then reset. The whole thing starts over. It is not pessimistic, it is just how the wheel turns. You build, you fall, you build again. The Buddhists have a similar idea with the wheel of Dharma. Actions have consequences, and those consequences ripple outward across timescales we can barely imagine. What you do today doesn't just affect tomorrow. It affects centuries from now. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. What if this isn't just philosophy? What if it is pattern recognition? Think about it. Right now, we've got the technology to wipe ourselves out in about a dozen different ways. Nuclear weapons. Check. We've had those since the 1940s. Environmental collapse? We are watching it happen in real time. AI systems that might outsmart us. We are building those right now, and half the people building them are publicly saying, hey, this might be a really bad idea. We are not the first species to have this problem. But we might be the first to see it coming, and do it anyway. There's this thing called the Fermi paradox. Enrico Fermi, brilliant physicist, asked a simple question. If the universe is so big and so old, where is everybody? Where are all the aliens? The silence is deafening. One possible answer is called the Great Filter. It is the idea that there's some step in the evolution of civilizations that almost nobody gets past. Maybe it is the jump from single-celled life to complex life. Maybe it is developing intelligence. Or maybe, and this is the scary one, maybe it's what happens right after you get really, really good at technology. Maybe every civilization reaches a point where they can split atoms, or alter their climate or build thinking machines, and almost all of them do not make it through. They filter themselves out. We might be looking at our own future in the silence of space. Now here's the moral weight of all this. If there was a civilization before us, an advanced one, and they destroyed themselves, let's say through environmental collapse or warfare, or just pure technological hubris, are we repeating their mistakes? Look at how we measure progress. GDP, growth. Technological, innovation. Faster phones, bigger rockets, smarter algorithms. But what about wisdom? What about the moral development to use those tools responsibly? That doesn't show up in quarterly earnings reports. We've gotten really, really good at building things. We are not so great at asking whether we should build them. There's this concept in ancient thought, in Greek tragedy especially, called cosmic justice. It is the idea that hubris, excessive pride, overreach, naturally leads to downfall. It is not punishment from angry gods. It is just physics. Social physics, maybe. You fly too close to the sun, your wings melt. You build a tower to heaven, it falls. You split the atom without wisdom, you get Hiroshima. The universe might have a built-in correction mechanism for civilizations that get too clever for their own good. And here's what really keeps me up at night. Every generation thinks they are different. Every generation thinks, sure, those people back then made mistakes, but we are smarter. We've learned. And then we do the exact same thing with fancier tools. It is like civilizations are teenagers who just got the car keys. Every generation has to learn not to crash. Some learn by watching others. Some learn the hard way. And some do not learn at all. So when we look at ancient myths about destroyed civilizations, when we find evidence of cultures that rose high and vanished, maybe we shouldn't just see it as archaeology. Maybe we should see it as a warning label. Caution, civilization. Handle with care. May be more fragile than it appears. Men? The question isn't really whether there was an advanced civilization before us. The question is, if there was, and they are gone now, what does that tell us about the road we are on? Because here's the thing about cycles. You can recognize them. You can see the pattern. And if you are really paying attention, maybe, just maybe, you can choose to do something different. That's what this whole journey is about. Not just solving a historical mystery, but understanding what it means for us, right now, today. Because the stones and the myths and the underwater ruins, they are all asking us the same question. Are we building something that lasts, or are we just setting up the next reset? Let's find out. Now that's not just philosophy and ancient stories. Let's talk about the science. Because around 800 years ago, something happened that almost erased everything. It is called the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, and here's what it suggests. Earth got hit by fragments of a comet. Not just one impact, multiple strikes across the planet. And the evidence? It is in the dirt. Scientists have found a layer of sediment from this exact time period that contains things that shouldn't be there. Platinum, for one. Way more platinum than you'd normally find in soil. And nanodiamonds, these microscopic diamonds that only form under extreme heat and pressure, the kind you get from a cosmic impact or an explosion. This layer exists across North America, Europe, and the Middle East. Different continents, same time period, same strange materials. That's not a coincidence. So what would an impact like that actually do? Well, imagine a comet fragment, maybe a mile wide, slamming into the ice sheet that covered North America. The ice vaporizes instantly. The shock wave flattens forests for hundreds of miles. The heat starts wildfires across entire continents. And then comes the real nightmare. All that vaporized ice becomes moisture in the atmosphere, which means rain. Torrential, weeks-long rain. Floods that do not stop. The temperature drops dramatically because all that debris in the atmosphere blocks the sun. The planet plunges into what's called the Younger Dryas period, a sudden return to Ice Age conditions that lasts for over 1,000 years. And who doesn't survive this? The megafauna. Woolly mammoths, giant ground sloths, saber-toothed cats, all gone. 35 genera of large mammals in North America, extinct within a geological blink. Some scientists argue it was just climate change and human hunting, but the timing is suspicious. Right when this impact layer appears, they all disappear. Now here's where it gets interesting for our question about lost civilizations. If animals that had survived multiple ice ages suddenly couldn't make it through this one, what happened to humans? We know human populations crashed. Genetic studies show what's called bottleneck event, times when our species got reduced to just a few thousand individuals. We almost didn't make it. And if we, as scattered hunter-gatherers, almost went extinct, what would have happened to any settled communities? Any coastal cities? Any civilization that had started to build something? They'd be gone. Completely. Because here's the other piece of evidence we cannot ignore. At the peak of the last ice age, the oceans were about 400 feet lower than today. That's a 40-story building of difference. And then, as the ice melted, especially after this impact event, the water came back fast. We are not talking about a gradual rise you could adapt to. Geological evidence shows periods where sea levels rose several feet per century. That might not sound like much, but think about where humans live. We cluster on coasts. We build our cities at the water's edge because that's where the resources are, where the trade happens, where life is easiest. If you were living on the coast 12, 0 years ago, and the sea started rising, you'd move inland, sure. But everything you built? The ports, the homes, the monuments, whatever infrastructure existed, all of that goes underwater. And 400 feet of ocean is a lot of water. It doesn't just cover things, it grinds them down with waves and currents. It buries them under sediment. After 0 years, good luck finding anything recognizable. This is the part that makes archaeologists uncomfortable. We are looking for ancient civilizations on land, on current coastlines. But if they existed, they'd be underwater now. And we've only mapped about 5% of the ocean floor in high resolution. We are basically searching for evidence in the wrong place. Think about it this way. If Miami got flooded tomorrow and stayed underwater for 0 years, what would survive? Maybe some of the larger concrete structures, the really big stuff. But your house, the roads, the strip malls, gone, one, corroded, collapsed, buried. Future archaeologists would find scattered debris and have to guess what it all meant. That's what we are dealing with when we search for pre-flood civilizations. We are looking at the wreckage after the reset button got hit. And it is not just one event. Earth has been through multiple catastrophes. Asteroid impacts, supervolcano eruptions, magnetic pole shifts. Each one capable of wiping the slate clean. The Tuba supervolcano eruption 0 years ago created a volcanic winter that may have reduced humans to just a few thousand survivors. We made it through, but barely. The pattern repeats throughout geological history. There are layers in the rock record showing mass extinctions, sudden climate shifts, evidence of impacts. Earth is not a stable place. It is a shooting gallery, and we are just targets that have been lucky so far. So when people ask, where's the evidence of an advanced ancient civilization? The answer might be underwater, ground to pieces, buried under centuries of sediment, or simply erased by catastrophes we can barely imagine surviving. The science doesn't prove there was a lost civilization, but it absolutely proves that if there was one, nature had every opportunity to erase it completely. The Younger Dryas event alone would have been enough to send any developing society back to the Stone Age. You do not recover from a 1,000-year ice age. You survive it, if you are lucky, and you start over. And maybe that's the scariest part. Not that it happened once, but that it could happen again. Comet fragments are still out there. The Carrington event of 1859 was a solar storm that fried telegraph systems, the only electrical infrastructure we had at the time. If that happened today, it would knock out power grids, satellites, all our communications. We'd be in the dark, and we do not remember how to live without electricity. We are not immune to catastrophe. We are just living in the space between them, building higher and higher, hoping the next reset doesn't come in our lifetime. But it came before. And the people who survived had to tell their children what happened. They had to pass down the memory of the world that was lost. And that's where the myths come from. Let's talk about stories. Every culture on Earth has them. Stories about floods. Stories about great cities swallowed by water. Stories about a time before, when things were different, when people knew more, built bigger, lived in ways we can barely imagine now. And here's the thing that should make us pause. They are all telling the same story. The Sumerians, in what's now Iraq, wrote about it on clay tablets 5,000 years ago. They called it the Epic of Gilgamesh, and in it, the gods send a flood to wipe out humanity. One man builds a boat, saves his family and the animals, starts over. Sound familiar? That's because it is also in the Bible. Noah's Ark. The whole world flooded, everything destroyed, humanity getting a second chance. But it doesn't stop there. The Hindus have the story of Manu, who's warned by a fish about a coming deluge. He builds a boat, survives, restarts civilization. In ancient Greece, Zeus floods the world to punish humanity. Deucalion builds an ark. Native American tribes across the continent tell stories of great floods. The Ojibwe, the Hopi, the Haida. All of them have versions where the world is destroyed by water and only a few survive. There are over 200 cultures worldwide with flood myths. 200. That's not a coincidence. Now, you could say, well, floods happen. People live near water. Of course they tell stories about floods. And sure, that makes sense for local floods. But these stories aren't about a river overflowing or a bad storm season. They are about the entire world flooding. About everything being lost. About humanity having to start over from almost nothing. That's oddly specific. And then there's Atlantis. Most people think Plato just made it up, right? A parable about hubris, a fictional warning about pride and power. But that's not actually what Plato said. He was very clear about this. He claimed that Egyptian priests told the story to Solon, the Greek lawmaker, around 600 BCE. And these priests said Atlantis was real. They said it existed 9,000 years before Solon's time. They described it as an advanced civilization that sank into the ocean in a single day and night. 9,000 years before Solon. That's 9,600 BCE. Right around the end of the last ice age. Right when sea levels were rising catastrophically fast. Plato insisted this wasn't fiction. He said the story came from Egyptian records, records that were far older than anything the Greeks had. And you know what? The Egyptians were meticulous record keepers. Their civilization was already ancient when Greece was just getting started. So was Plato lying? Was he mistaken? Or was he accurately reporting what he'd been told? Here's where it gets even more interesting. The Aboriginal Australians have oral traditions that describe coastlines from over 10,000 years ago. They tell stories about places that are now underwater, about islands that no longer exist, about times when you could walk to places that are now separated by ocean. And we've checked. Using modern seafloor mapping, we've confirmed that they are right. The places they describe in their stories match exactly where the coastline would have been before the seas rose at the end of the Ice Age. They remembered. For 10,000 years, they remembered. That's about 400 generations of people passing down the same stories, keeping the same details alive, maintaining the same geographical knowledge, without writing any of it down. We didn't think that was possible. We thought oral traditions were unreliable, that they'd changed too much over time, that they couldn't preserve real information for more than a few hundred years at most. We were wrong. And then there's Göbekli Tepe. This one's not a myth. It is real stones, real archaeology, and it shouldn't exist. It is in Turkey, on a hilltop, in the middle of nowhere. Massive stone pillars, some weighing 20 tons, arranged in perfect circles. Intricate carvings of animals, geometric patterns, symbols we do not understand. There are at least 20 of these circular structures, and we've only excavated a fraction of the site. It was built 600 years ago. Let that sink in. This temple complex is older than agriculture. It is older than pottery. It is older than metalworking. It predates Stonehenge by 6,000 years. It predates the Egyptian pyramids by 7,000 years. According to everything we thought we knew about human history, the people who built Göbekli Tepe were supposed to be hunter-gatherers. Small bands, nomadic, living hand to mouth, no time or resources for massive construction projects. But they built it anyway. They quarried those stones, moved them, carved them, erected them in precise arrangements. They organized labor on a massive scale. They had the knowledge, the tools, the social organization to create something that would last for over 10 millennia. And then they buried it. Deliberately. They filled in the whole site with dirt and rocks, covering the pillars completely, preserving them for us to find. Why? We do not know. But here's what we are starting to suspect. Göbekli Tepe might not be the beginning of something. It might be the end of something. It might be what was left after everything else was lost. Because look at the pattern. All these myths, all of these stories from around the world, they do not just talk about floods. They talk about what came before. A golden age. A time of plenty. A time when people lived longer, knew more, built cities that would make ours look small. And then, the flood. The catastrophe. The reset. And after? Survivors. Scattered remnants. People trying to remember what was lost, passing down stories to their children, their children's children, hoping that someday, someone will understand what they are trying to say. That's exactly what oral traditions are for. They are not entertainment. They are not just stories. They are memory. Cultural memory. They are how people without writing preserve the most important information across vast stretches of time. The uncomfortable truth we are starting to face is this: oral traditions are way more reliable than we gave them credit for. When 200 cultures separated by oceans tell the same story about a global flood, when Aboriginal Australians remember coastlines from 10,000 years ago, when Plato insists Egyptian priests told him about a lost civilization from the end of the Ice Age, maybe we should listen. Maybe the myths are trying to tell us something we've been too confident to hear. Maybe they are not myths at all. And now that we are listening to what the myths might be telling us, let's look at something you can actually touch. Something that's been sitting there for thousands of years, waiting for someone to ask the uncomfortable question. You know what's wild? We can look at a smartphone and understand exactly how impressive it is because we know the progression. We went from punch cards to floppy disks to the internet. We can trace every step. But when you stand in front of certain ancient structures, that progression disappears. It is like finding an iPhone in a cave painting. Take Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. We covered this briefly when talking about myths, but let's really sit with what this place is. It is 11,600 years old. That's 6,000 years before Stonehenge, before the pyramids, before writing. The people who built it weren't supposed to have agriculture yet. They were hunter-gatherers. And somehow, they carved limestone pillars that weigh up to 20 tons, covered them with intricate animal reliefs, and arranged them in perfect circles. Think about that for a second. You are a hunter-gatherer. Your big achievement is supposed to be figuring out which berries will not kill you. And in your spare time, you are organizing hundreds of people to quarry massive stones, transport them, carve them with detail that would take months, and arrange them according to some astronomical alignment we are still trying to decode. It doesn't add up. It is not that it is impossible. It is that it suggests a level of social organization and knowledge that shouldn't exist yet. But Göbekli Tepe is just the beginning. Let's fly over to Egypt. The Great Pyramid of Giza. You've seen it in pictures. Maybe you think you know it. But here's what most people do not realize. It is aligned to true north within 3/60ths of a single degree. That's not pretty close. That's more accurate than most modern buildings. To achieve that, you need to understand the stars, track them across multiple nights, do some fairly complex mathematics. And you need to maintain that precision while placing 2.5 million stone blocks, some weighing up to 80 tons. The standard explanation is that they used copper chisels, wooden sledges, and lots of people. And sure, that works on paper. But when you really try to imagine it, the logistics become almost absurd. You'd need thousands of workers moving synchronized like a machine, for decades, with zero room for error, to create something that precise. We can do it today with laser levels and computer modeling. They did it with rope and eyeballing it? That's the claim, anyway. Now we head to Bolivia. Puma Punku. 15,000 feet above sea level. There are andesite stone blocks cut so precisely that you cannot fit a piece of paper between them. No mortar. Just stone on stone, with 90-degree angles that look like they were machine cut. Andesite, by the way, is one of the hardest stones you can work with. It is right behind granite on the hardness scale. The civilization that built this supposedly didn't have iron tools, let alone diamond-tipped saws. Some of these stones have drill holes that are perfectly circular and go several inches deep. You try drilling a straight hole in andesite with a copper tube and sand. Modern engineers have attempted it. It takes forever, and it doesn't look anything like what's at Puma Punku. So how'd they do it? Nobody knows. That's the honest answer. We have guesses. We have theories. But nobody's been able to replicate it using the tools we think they had. Then there's Baalbek in Lebanon. The Romans built a temple there, and that's impressive enough. But underneath the Roman construction, there are stones from an earlier civilization. And when I say stones, I mean the largest cut stones ever moved by humans. The stone of the pregnant woman weighs about 1,200 tons. That's 1,200 tons. A modern crane maxes out around 20,000 tons for the biggest ones, and they need very specific conditions. This stone was cut, moved across a quarry, and lifted into place as part of a foundation wall. Using what? We do not know. The thing is, we've gotten really good at saying, well, with enough people and enough time, anything's possible. And that's true. But it dodges the question. Why would you move a 1,200-ton stone when you could cut it into smaller pieces? What's the purpose of making it that difficult? Unless it wasn't difficult for them. Unless they had techniques we've completely forgotten. Here's where it gets interesting. There's a guy named Edward Leeds Cullinan who built Coral Castle in Florida in the early 1900s. He was 5 feet tall, weighed 100 pounds, and he moved stones weighing multiple tons by himself. He did this at night, in secret, and never told anyone his methods. When people asked him how he did it, he'd say things like, "I have discovered the secrets of the pyramids." He died in 1951, and the secret died with him. Now, Coral Castle isn't on the scale of ancient megalithic sites, but it proves a point. One person with the right technique can do things that seem impossible. So maybe the ancients weren't using brute force. Maybe they knew something about leverage, counterweights, or physics that we've had to rediscover. The engineering problem isn't that we cannot move these stones today. It is that we cannot figure out how they moved them then. And that's uncomfortable because we like our narrative of progress. We like thinking we are smarter, more capable, more advanced than people who lived thousands of years ago. But what if we are not more advanced? What if we are just different? What if they invested their intelligence into mastering stone the way we invest ours into mastering silicon? Standing in front of these structures does something to you. It is not just awe. It is a kind of intellectual vertigo. Because every stone is a question we cannot fully answer. And the more precisely they are cut, the heavier they are, the older they turn out to be, the louder that question gets. How? And maybe more importantly, what else did they know? Cities beneath the waves now. Here's where things get really interesting. If you are looking for evidence of ancient civilizations in all the places we've already searched, on mountains, in deserts, on current coastlines, you might be looking in completely the wrong places. Think about it this way. Where do humans build their cities today? We build on coastlines. We build near water. Some of the world's greatest cities, New York, Tokyo, London, Mumbai, they are all coastal. It is where trade happens, where life is easiest, where civilizations naturally flourish. But here's the problem. During the last ice age, which ended about 12,000 years ago, sea levels were roughly 400 feet lower than they are today. 400 feet. That means the coastline of every continent on Earth was completely different. What we think of as the coast today was, back then, miles and miles inland. The real prime coastal real estate from that era. It is all underwater now. So if you are an archaeologist looking for evidence of Ice Age civilizations, and you are digging on land, you are basically searching for evidence of ancient Miami by exploring the Everglades. You are missing the beach entirely. And we are starting to find things underwater that do not quite fit the story we've been told. Let's start with Dwarka, off the coast of India. According to Hindu texts, specifically the Mahabharata, there was once a magnificent city called Dwarka, built by Lord Krishna. It was supposed to be this gleaming metropolis that eventually sank beneath the waves. For centuries, scholars treated this as pure mythology. A nice story, nothing more. Then, in the 1980s, marine archaeologists actually started looking. And they found something. Underwater stone structures, walls, what appeared to be foundations of buildings, all sitting on the ocean floor off the coast of Gujarat. When they dated the artifacts they pulled up, some of them came back as being 90 years old. Now, mainstream archaeology will tell you these are natural formations, or much more recent structures. But there they are, geometric patterns, right angles, arranged stones, right where the ancient texts said a city would be. Then, there's the Yonaguni Monument off the coast of Japan. In 1987, a dive instructor discovered these massive underwater formations, stone structures with flat surfaces, right angles, what look like stairs, terraces, even pillars. Some of the stones are 25 feet tall. The debate around Yonaguni is fierce. Geologists say it is natural rock that's been eroded in ways that just happen to look artificial. But other researchers point to things that are harder to explain away. Straight edges, parallel grooves that look suspiciously like tool marks, angles that seem too precise to be random erosion. Here's what makes it compelling. If these formations were carved by humans, they would have had to be above water when the work was done. Based on the depth where they sit now, that would place them at over 10,000 years old. And that's uncomfortable. Because according to our current timeline, there weren't supposed to be people in that region capable of monumental architecture 10,000 years ago. Over in the Bahamas, there's something called the Bimini Road, an underwater rock formation that looks, to some people, like a carefully laid stone pathway or harbor. It is made of rectangular limestone blocks that stretch for nearly half a mile along the seafloor. Discovered in 1968, it immediately sparked debate. Is it a road? Part of a harbor? Or just beach rock that fractured naturally into neat rectangular shapes? Most geologists lean toward the natural explanation. But here's the thing. If you look at it from above, the geometric arrangement is striking. And like Yonaguni, like Dwarka, it sits at a depth that suggests, if it is artificial, it would have to be very, very old. Perhaps the most intriguing find is off the coast of Cuba. In 2021, a team using advanced sonar equipment detected what appeared to be geometric stone structures on the ocean floor, in water about 20 feet deep. When they sent down remote cameras, they captured images of what looked like pyramid-shaped structures and other formations with right angles and symmetrical designs. Here's the issue. If those structures were built on land, sea levels would have had to be dramatically lower. Based on their depth, we are talking about them being built over 10,000 years ago, possibly much older. That timeline doesn't work with anything we know about human civilization in the Americas. The Cuban government seemed interested at first, but then the research quietly stopped. The site hasn't been thoroughly explored since. It is sitting there, waiting, 2,000 feet down. Now, I need to be clear, most of these underwater sites are hotly disputed. For every researcher who thinks they found evidence of ancient construction, there's another who can show you how geology creates shapes that look artificial. Nature is really good at making right angles and flat surfaces, especially in sedimentary rock. But here's what we know for certain. 95% of the ocean floor has never been mapped in high resolution. We know more about the surface of Mars than we do about the bottom of our own oceans. We've got entire mountain ranges down there we've never seen up close. We've got trenches, plains, underwater landscapes that remain almost completely unexplored. And if sea levels really were 400 feet lower during the Ice Age, which they absolutely were, then all the places where humans would naturally have built are now submerged. The river deltas, the harbors, the coastal plains where agriculture would have been easiest, it is all underwater. It is like trying to understand New York City's history, but Manhattan is under 400 feet of water, and you are only allowed to excavate in the Catskill Mountains. You'd find some stuff, sure, but you'd miss the heart of everything. This isn't wild speculation. This is basic logic. Humans lived through the Ice Age. Humans are drawn to coasts. The coasts moved. So where's the evidence of coastal Ice Age life? It is beneath the waves. We are only just beginning to develop the technology to really explore down there. Deep sea sonar, underwater drones, submarine archaeology, it is all advancing rapidly. Every year, we get better at seeing what's hidden in the depths. And every year, we find something new that makes us scratch our heads. The question isn't really whether there are ancient structures underwater. We know there are. We found Roman ports, Egyptian harbors, all sorts of things from the last few thousand years that sank or were submerged. The question is, how far back does it go? What's still down there, waiting in the dark, that might change everything we think we know about how long humans have been building, creating, and thriving on this planet? But here's where things get really strange. Because it is not just about what they built. It is about what they knew. See, when we look at ancient civilizations, we expect them to understand basic stuff. How to plant crops. How to build shelters. Maybe some simple astronomy to know when to plant those crops. But what we find, it goes way beyond that. Take the Sumerians. Around 3000 BCE, they are using a base 60 number system. You know what that is? It is why we have 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, 360 degrees in a circle. We still use it today. But here's the question nobody really answers. Where'd they get it? Because a base 60 system isn't intuitive. You and I, we've got 10 fingers. So we count in base 10. Makes sense. But base 60? That requires some serious mathematical sophistication. You need to understand multiplication, division, fractions in ways that suggest generations of mathematical development. And the Sumerians just show up with it, fully formed, in some of the earliest writing we've ever found. It is like watching a kid go from learning the alphabet straight to writing college-level calculus. There's supposed to be steps in between. Then there's the precession of the equinoxes. This is the big one. It is a 26-0-year cycle where Earth's axis slowly wobbles like a spinning top. You cannot see it in one lifetime. You cannot even see it in 10 lifetimes. You'd need careful astronomical observations passed down through centuries, maybe millennia, to even notice it as happening. But somehow, ancient cultures knew about it. The Egyptians encoded it into their mythology. The Mayans tracked it. There are references to it in Hindu texts that predate recorded history. How do you discover something that takes 26 years to complete unless you've got an unbroken chain of knowledge being passed down for, well, a really, really long time? And speaking of the Mayans, let's talk about their calendar. They calculated the solar year at 365.242 days. Our modern calculation, with satellites and atomic clocks, 365.242 days. They were off by less than 18 seconds. Without telescope. Without computers. Just careful observation and sophisticated mathematics. That's not a lucky guess. That's precision that took generations to achieve. Now, the Great Pyramid. You've probably heard this one before, but it is worth sitting with for a moment. The dimensions of this thing encode mathematical constants that we didn't officially discover until thousands of years later. The ratio of its height to its base perimeter? That's pi. The slope angle? That relates to phi, the golden ratio. And if you measure certain dimensions in what some researchers call pyramid inches, you get numbers that match the speed of light. Now, before you roll your eyes, I know what you are thinking. You can find any pattern if you look hard enough. Measure something enough different ways, you'll eventually hit on something that looks meaningful. And yeah, that's true. But here's the thing that's harder to explain away. They did this on purpose. The Great Pyramid isn't just big. It is aligned to true north within 3/60th of a single degree. That's more accurate than most modern buildings. The base is level to within a fraction of an inch across 13 acres. That level of precision doesn't happen by accident. It requires mathematical knowledge and engineering skill that we usually do not associate with people working with copper chisels and rope. Then, there's the maps. Specifically, the Piri Reis map from 1513. A Turkish admiral named Piri Reis compiled it from older source maps, some of which he claimed were from the time of Alexander the Great or earlier. And here's what's weird about it. Portions of the map appear to show the coastline of Antarctica. The accurate coastline. Not the ice shelf we see today, but the actual rocky coast underneath. Antarctica wasn't officially discovered until 1820. It wasn't fully mapped until the 1950s using ground-penetrating radar. So how does a map from 1513, compiled from ancient sources, show details we didn't confirm until the 20th century? The standard explanation is that it is a misidentified portion of South America, or that the similarities are coincidental. And maybe they are. But it is the kind of coincidence that makes you pause. Because here's the pattern. Again and again, we find ancient peoples knowing things they shouldn't know. Not myths. Not stories. Mathematical and astronomical knowledge that requires generations of careful study and record-keeping. It is like finding your great-great-grandfather's notebook and discovering he'd written out the exact formula for something we only invented last year. Technically possible he figured it out independently, but it raises questions. Big questions. Like, what else did he know? Where did he learn it? And who taught him? The standard historical model says civilization develops linearly. You start with hunter-gatherers. They figure out farming. Farming leads to cities. Cities lead to specialization. Specialization leads to mathematics, astronomy, engineering. Each step builds on the last. It takes time. Lots of time. But what if knowledge doesn't have to develop linearly? What if it can be passed down? Inherited? What if these ancient cultures weren't figuring it all out from scratch, but remembering? Because here's the thing about mathematics. Once you know it, it is easy to preserve. You do not need to understand why the formula works to use it. You just need to remember it. Ancient priests could have been passing down calculations for centuries without fully understanding the theory behind them. Like a recipe you follow exactly, even though you do not know the chemistry of why the bread rises. And if that's true, if these ancient cultures were working from inherited knowledge rather than discovering it fresh, then the question becomes, who were they inheriting it from? It is the same puzzle we keep running into. The stones that shouldn't exist. The myths that remember real events. The cities under the waves. And now, mathematics that seems to arrive fully formed without the expected developmental stages. You start to wonder, what if the timeline we've been taught isn't just incomplete? What if there's a whole chapter we are missing? Not because archaeologists are hiding something, but because the evidence is buried too deep, lost too completely, or scattered across the ocean floor where we haven't looked yet. The mathematics doesn't lie. These ancient peoples knew things. Sophisticated things. And knowledge like that doesn't appear out of nowhere. It has a source. The question is, where did it come from? The question is, where did it come from? And here's the uncomfortable answer. We might never know, because we've been terrible at keeping track of what we've already figured out. Let's talk about historical amnesia, the stuff we've forgotten, the knowledge we've lost, and why it should make us pay attention to what we are doing right now. In 48 BCE, the Library of Alexandria caught fire. You've probably heard about this. It has become this symbol of lost knowledge, this tragic moment when humanity lost its memory. The estimates vary, but we are talking about somewhere around 400 scrolls. Gone. Think about that for a second. Not books, scrolls. Each one hand-copied, containing knowledge that might have taken someone a lifetime to gather. We'll never know what was in most of them. Maybe instructions for technologies we are still trying to figure out. Maybe histories of places we do not have any other records of. Maybe just really good recipes. The point is, it is gone, and we cannot get it back. But here's the thing, Alexandria wasn't even the worst of it. When the Spanish conquistadors arrived in the Americas, they found the Maya had thousands of books. These weren't primitive picture books. They were sophisticated texts covering astronomy, mathematics, history, medicine. The Spanish looked at them and decided they were the work of the devil. So they burned them. Almost all of them. Today, we have exactly 4 Mayan codices left. 4. Out of thousands. Imagine trying to understand an entire civilization's knowledge from 4 books. It is like trying to understand modern America from a phone book, a cookbook, a car manual, and a romance novel. You'd get some pieces, sure, but you'd miss so much. And we do this all the time. We lose knowledge, and then centuries later we are scratching our heads wondering how people used to do things. Take Roman concrete. The Romans built structures 2,000 years ago that are still standing today. The Pantheon in Rome, built in 126 CEA. That dome is still the world's largest unreinforced concrete dome. It has been sitting there for nearly 2 millennia, and it is fine. Meanwhile, modern concrete? It starts cracking after a few decades. We build bridges that need repairs after 20 years. The Romans built harbors that lasted centuries underwater. So, what was their secret? We didn't know. The recipe was lost sometime after the fall of Rome. For over 1,000 years, we couldn't figure it out. We are only now starting to understand they used volcanic ash in a specific way that made the concrete actually get stronger when it came into contact with seawater. We had to rediscover it. Something the Romans considered basic construction knowledge. Or, look at Greek fire. The Byzantines had this weapon that was absolutely devastating. It was like napalm, but better. It burned on water. You couldn't put it out. Enemy ships would see it coming and just surrender because they knew if that stuff hit them, they were done. The formula was kept so secret that when the Byzantine Empire fell, the knowledge went with it. We have descriptions of what it did. We have accounts of battles where it was used. But we do not know how to make it. We can guess, probably something with petroleum, maybe quicklime, possibly sulfur, but we are literally guessing. These aren't ancient mysteries. This is stuff that was in use just a few hundred years ago, and we've completely forgotten how it worked. And then there's the Bronze Age collapse. Around 1200 BCE, every major civilization in the Mediterranean and the Near East fell apart. We are talking about the Hittites, the Mycenaeans, the Egyptians' New Kingdom, the Assyrians. All of them crashed at roughly the same time. Cities were abandoned. Trade networks collapsed. And here's the really interesting part. Literacy disappeared. For centuries afterward, people in these regions couldn't read or write. They'd forgotten how. Think about that. Entire civilizations that had writing systems, that kept records, that had libraries, and then suddenly, nobody could read anymore. It took hundreds of years for literacy to come back. We do not even know exactly why it happened. There are theories, maybe climate change, maybe invasions by mysterious sea peoples, maybe a cascade of failures where the collapse of one civilization dragged down the others. But the point is, advanced societies with centuries of accumulated knowledge went dark, and most of that knowledge vanished with them. This keeps happening. It is not a one-time thing. It is a pattern. And here's what really gets me. We act like we are immune to this now. We think because we have the internet and digital storage and cloud backups we are safe. Our knowledge is permanent. But is it? The internet feels eternal, but it is incredibly fragile. Most digital storage degrades within decades. Servers fail. File formats become obsolete. How many of you have tried to open a file from 20 years ago and discovered you do not have the software to read it anymore? We are actually more dependent on complex systems than any civilization before us, which might make us more vulnerable, not less. The people of the Library of Alexandria probably thought their knowledge was safe too. It was all written down, copied multiple times, stored in the greatest library in the world. And then it burned. The Maya probably thought their books would last. They were important, records of their history, their science, their beliefs. And then someone else decided they shouldn't exist. The Romans definitely didn't think they'd forget how to make concrete. It was everywhere. Everyone used it. And then the empire fell, and somehow the knowledge slipped away. We've lost more than we've kept. That's the sobering truth. The vast majority of human knowledge that's ever existed is gone. What we have now is just the stuff that managed to survive, the lucky scraps that made it through fires and floods and conquests and simple neglect. So when we talk about a lost advanced civilization, maybe we are asking the wrong question. Maybe it is not, could there have been one? Maybe it is, how would we ever know if there was one? Because if we can lose the recipe for concrete in just 1,000 years, if we can forget how to read in just a few centuries, what could we lose in 10,000 years? What have we already lost? Here's the narration script for part 8. So here's the uncomfortable truth about science. It is designed to move slowly. And that's actually a good thing. Most of the time. See, archaeologists aren't being stubborn when they resist changing timelines. They are being careful. Because the scientific method isn't about having exciting ideas, it is about proving them. You need evidence. Lots of it. From multiple sources. Peer-reviewed. Replicated. It is why we teach students to be conservative. To wait. To demand extraordinary evidence for extraordinary claims. But sometimes, and this is the tricky part, that caution turns into something else. It becomes resistance. Not to bad ideas, but to any idea that doesn't fit the current model. Let's talk about the out of Africa timeline. For decades, we taught that modern humans left Africa around 60 years ago. That was the consensus. The textbook answer. Then we found 90-year-old human remains in China. The timeline shifted. Then 120-year-old tools in the Arabian Peninsula. The timeline shifted again. Then 210-year-old human fossils in Greece. Each time the experts said, well, we need to revise our understanding. Which is great. That's science working. But here's the question. How many times does the timeline need to shift before we admit we might be fundamentally wrong about how this works? Or, take the Clovis first theory. For most of the 20th century, American archaeology had a simple story. Humans first arrived in the Americas about 13 years ago. They were called the Clovis people, named after distinctive spear points found in New Mexico. Anyone who suggested humans arrived earlier was dismissed. Careers were damaged over it. Then, in 1997, Monteverde in Chile was finally accepted by the mainstream. Humans were there 800 years ago. Before Clovis. Then, we found the Buttermilk Creek site in Texas. 500 years ago. Then White Sands in New Mexico. Footprints. 23 years ago. The experts who built their careers defending Clovis first didn't suddenly become stupid. The evidence changed. But the theory should have been more flexible all along. Because here's the thing about absence of evidence. We use it to mean evidence of absence. But that's a logical fallacy. Just because we haven't found something doesn't mean it didn't exist. It might mean we haven't looked in the right place, or that it didn't preserve, or that we are not recognizing it when we see it. 95% of the ocean floor remains unmapped at high resolution. We've explored more of Mars than Earth's seafloor. So when someone says there's no evidence of ancient coastal cities, what they really mean is we haven't found any yet in the 5% we've looked at. That's not the same thing. Now, I want to be clear here. I'm not saying we should believe everything. Healthy skepticism is vital. But skepticism should cut both ways. You know the story of continental drift? Alfred Wegener proposed it in 1912. He had evidence, matching fossils on different continents, identical rock formations, coastlines that fit together like puzzle pieces. The scientific establishment destroyed him, called him a fraud, said it was impossible for continents to move. It took 50 years, and Wegener died before seeing it, for plate tectonics to be accepted. Now, it is in every textbook. We teach it to children. But for half a century, the mainstream was completely demonstrably wrong. Or Helicobacter pylori, the bacteria that causes ulcers. For decades, doctors knew ulcers were caused by stress and spicy food. Everyone agreed. Then 2 Australian scientists proved it was actually a bacterial infection. They were ridiculed. One of them drank a culture of the bacteria and gave himself ulcers to prove it. They won the Nobel Prize in 25. So when someone says that's what the mainstream believes, remember, the mainstream has been wrong before. Sometimes for generations. But, and this is crucial, fringe theories are usually wrong too. Most challenges to established science fail because they are actually bad ideas, not because of some conspiracy. The trick is finding the balance. Being open enough to consider new evidence. Rigorous enough to demand that evidence be solid. And that's harder than it sounds. Because we all have biases. Archaeologists have spent their careers building on certain assumptions. It is not easy to say maybe we need to start over. Plus, there's the replication crisis. Studies that cannot be reproduced. Data that doesn't hold up. It has made everyone more cautious, more defensive. But here's what gives me hope. Science does correct itself. Eventually. Every time we find something that doesn't fit, we adjust. The timeline for human migration keeps getting pushed back because we keep finding older evidence. That's the system working. The question is, how much are we missing because we are not looking? How many sites remain undiscovered because they are underwater or under cities or in places we've decided humans couldn't have been? How many artifacts sit in museum storage, labeled wrong, because they do not match what we expect to find? The mainstream isn't a conspiracy. It is just people doing their best with the information they have, trying to be careful. But careful can become closed. Conservative can become rigid. And sometimes, just sometimes, the fringe theory turns out to be right. The real wisdom is knowing that both sides might be wrong. That the truth is probably more complex than either the mainstream narrative or the alternative theories suggest. That's what keeps this interesting. Not picking a side, but staying curious. Demanding evidence, but remaining open to surprise. Because if there's one thing the history of science teaches us, it is this: we are probably going to be embarrassed by what future generations discover we got completely wrong. But here's where things get really interesting. It is not just about what we've lost, or whether mainstream science is catching up. It is about recognizing a pattern that shows up everywhere, in every culture, across every continent. Because when you start looking, you realize everybody tells this story. The ancient Greeks had it. They called it the Golden Age, a time when humanity lived in harmony, when life was easier, when people were somehow better. Then something happened, and we fell from grace. The Hindus tell the same story, but they call it the Satya Yuga, the Age of Truth, where humans lived for thousands of years and possessed knowledge we've since forgotten. The Chinese have their legends of the three sovereigns, god kings, who taught humanity the secrets of civilization. Mesoamerican traditions speak of previous worlds that were destroyed, each one making way for the next. It is the same story, wearing different clothes. And you have to wonder, why? Why does every civilization tell a version of things used to be better? Part of it is psychological. There's actually a name for this, rosy retrospection. We are wired to remember the past more fondly than we experienced it. Your brain smooths over the hard parts and highlights the good stuff. That's why your parents think music was better when they were young, and why you probably think the same thing about your own childhood. It is comforting to believe there was a time when things made more sense, when life was simpler, when humanity hadn't screwed everything up yet. But that's not the whole story. Because, while it is easy to dismiss these myths as just nostalgia, some of them contain details that are harder to explain away. Take the Tower of Babel, for instance. It is usually taught as a simple morality tale about human pride. But what if you read it differently? What if it is preserving a memory of something real, a time when humans shared a common language, a unified culture, maybe even a centralized civilization? And then, something catastrophic happened. The civilization fragmented. People scattered. Languages diverged. Knowledge was lost. Sound familiar? It is basically what happened after the Bronze Age collapse. Advanced civilizations around the Mediterranean, the Hittites, the Mycenaeans, the Egyptians, they all crashed simultaneously around 1200 BCE. Trade networks collapsed. Writing systems were forgotten. For centuries afterward, people told stories about the before times when things were better. Now, here's where it gets uncomfortable for some people. For a long time, the way we understood ancient and indigenous peoples was shaped by colonialism. European explorers encountered cultures that didn't have guns or ships like theirs, and they made an assumption: these people must be primitive, less evolved, earlier on the ladder of human progress. And that assumption got baked into archaeology, into anthropology, into how we teach history. But that assumption was wrong. Dead wrong. And we are still unlearning it. Take Polynesian navigation. For centuries, Westerners couldn't figure out how Polynesians had settled islands across thousands of miles of open ocean without compasses or maps. The prevailing theory was basically they got lucky. Insulting, right? Turns out, Polynesian wayfinders used a sophisticated system of reading stars, waves, currents, and bird flight patterns. They could navigate with precision across vast distances using knowledge passed down through generations. Modern sailors using GPS struggle to replicate their accuracy. Or consider Aboriginal Australians. They've maintained oral traditions for over 65 years, the oldest continuous culture on Earth. And these aren't just stories. They contain practical knowledge encoded in song cycles and dreamtime narratives. Star maps that chart the movements of celestial bodies. Descriptions of coastlines that match the geography from 10 years ago, now proven accurate by modern underwater mapping. Memory preserved across timescales that make written history look like a teenager's diary. This is sophisticated knowledge. It required careful observation, mathematical thinking, and complex systems for passing information across generations. It is just not the kind of sophistication we were taught to recognize. And that's the thing that should humble us. maybe civilization doesn't work the way we thought it did. We've been taught to think of human progress as a straight line. You start primitive. You invent agriculture, you build cities, you develop writing, you create technology. Boom! Modern civilization. Linear. Dot. Inevitable. Forward motion only. But what if it is not linear? What if it is cyclical? What if human civilization is more like seasons than like climbing a ladder? Societies rise, they flourish, they accumulate knowledge and build incredible things. And then something happens, environmental collapse, war, disease, cosmic impact, and they fall. Knowledge is lost. Survivors scatter. And slowly, painfully, humanity rebuilds. It is not a comforting thought. But it fits the evidence better than the story we've been telling ourselves. It explains why we find sophisticated structures like Göbekli Tepe appearing too early in the timeline. It explains why myths from around the world describe ages of former glory, followed by catastrophe. It explains why so many ancient cultures seem to possess knowledge about astronomy, about mathematics, about engineering, that feels advanced for their supposed place in history. Maybe they weren't advanced for their time. Maybe they were preserving fragments of knowledge from an earlier time. Maybe what we call the dawn of civilization was actually a reboot. And if that's true, if civilizations have risen and fallen before us, then we are not special. We are not the pinnacle of human achievement. We are just the current chapter. We are standing on the shoulders of giants, but some of those giants might have been our own ancestors, separated from us not by evolution, but by catastrophe and time. That's what these stories are trying to tell us. That's why every culture tells some version of the same tale. It is not just mythology or wishful thinking. It is memory. Distorted, mythologized, wrapped in religious language and cultural metaphor, but memory nonetheless. A warning maybe, passed down through the generations. We've been here before. We built something great. We lost it. Please, please, do not make the same mistakes. Human civilization might be less like climbing a ladder and more like a wheel that keeps turning. Sometimes forward, sometimes back. But always moving. Always human. Always reaching for something higher, even knowing we might fall again. The question is, are we listening? But here's where things get really interesting. It is not just about what we've lost, or whether mainstream science is catching up. It is about recognizing a pattern that shows up everywhere, in every culture, across every continent. Because when you start looking, you realize, everybody tells this story. The ancient Greeks had it. They called it the Golden Age, a time when humanity lived in harmony, when life was easier, when people were somehow better. Then, something happened, and we fell from grace. The Hindus tell the same story, but they call it the Satya Yuga, the age of truth, where humans lived for thousands of years and possessed knowledge we've since forgotten. The Chinese have their legends of the three sovereigns, god kings who taught humanity the secrets of civilization. Mesoamerican traditions speak of previous worlds that were destroyed, each one making way for the next. It is the same story, wearing different clothes. And you have to wonder, why? Why does every civilization tell a version of things used to be better? Part of it is psychological. There's actually a name for this, rosy retrospection. We are wired to remember the past more fondly than we experienced it. Your brain smooths over the hard parts and highlights the good stuff. That's why your parents think music was better when they were young, and why you probably think the same thing about your own childhood. It is comforting to believe there was a time when things made more sense, when life was simpler, when humanity hadn't screwed everything up yet. But that's not the whole story. Because while it is easy to dismiss these myths as just nostalgia, some of them contain details that are harder to explain away. Take the Tower of Babel, for instance. It is usually taught as a simple morality tale about human pride. But what if you read it differently? What if it is preserving a memory of something real, a time when humans shared a common language, a unified culture, maybe even a centralized civilization? And then something catastrophic happened. The civilization fragmented. People scattered. Languages diverged. Knowledge was lost. Sound familiar? It is basically what happened after the Bronze Age collapse. Advanced civilizations around the Mediterranean, the Hittites, the Mycenaeans, the Egyptians, they all crashed simultaneously around 1200 BCE. Trade networks collapsed. Writing systems were forgotten. For centuries afterward, people told stories about the before times when things were better. Now here's where it gets uncomfortable for some people. For a long time, the way we understood ancient and indigenous peoples was shaped by colonialism. European explorers encountered cultures that didn't have guns or ships like theirs, and they made an assumption: these people must be primitive, less evolved, earlier on the ladder of human progress. And that assumption got baked into archaeology, into anthropology, into how we teach history. But that assumption was wrong. Dead wrong. And we are still unlearning it. Take Polynesian navigation. For centuries, Westerners couldn't figure out how Polynesians had settled islands across thousands of miles of open ocean without compasses or maps. The prevailing theory was basically they got lucky. Insulting, right? Turns out, Polynesian wayfinders used a sophisticated system of reading stars, waves, currents, and bird flight patterns. They could navigate with precision across vast distances using knowledge passed down through generations. Modern sailors using GPS struggle to replicate their accuracy. Or consider Aboriginal Australians. They maintained oral traditions for over 65 years, the oldest continuous culture on Earth. And these aren't just stories. They contain practical knowledge encoded in psalm cycles and dreamtime narratives. Star maps that chart the movements of celestial bodies. Descriptions of coastlines that match the geography from 10,000 years ago, now proven accurate by modern underwater mapping. Memory preserved across timescales that make written history look like a teenager's diary. This is sophisticated knowledge. It required careful observation, mathematical thinking, and complex systems for passing information across generations. It is just not the kind of sophistication we were taught to recognize. And that's the thing that should humble us. Maybe civilization doesn't work the way we thought it did. We've been taught to think of human progress as a straight line. You start primitive, you invent agriculture, you build cities, you develop writing, you create technology. Boom, modern civilization. Linear. Inevitable. Forward motion only. But what if it is not linear? What if it is cyclical? What if human civilization is more like seasons than like climbing a ladder? Societies rise, they flourish, they accumulate knowledge and build incredible things. And then something happens: environmental collapse, war, disease, cosmic impact, and they fall. Knowledge is lost. Survivors scatter. And slowly, painfully, humanity rebuilds. It is not a comforting thought, but it fits the evidence better than the story we've been telling ourselves. It explains why we find sophisticated structures like Göbekli Tepe appearing too early in the timeline. It explains why myths from around the world describe ages of former glory, followed by catastrophe. It explains why so many ancient cultures seem to possess knowledge about astronomy, about mathematics, about engineering, that feels advanced for their supposed place in history. Maybe they weren't advanced for their time. Maybe they were preserving fragments of knowledge from an earlier time. Maybe what we call the dawn of civilization was actually a reboot. And it's true. If civilizations have risen and fallen before us, then we are not special. We are not the pinnacle of human achievement. We are just the current chapter. We are standing on the shoulders of giants, but some of those giants might have been our own ancestors, separated from us not by evolution, but by catastrophe and time. That's what these stories are trying to tell us. That's why every culture tells some version of the same tale. It is not just mythology or wishful thinking. It is memory. Distorted, mythologized, wrapped in religious language and cultural metaphor, but memory nonetheless. A warning, maybe, passed down through the generations. We've been here before. We built something great. We lost it. Please, please, do not make the same mistakes. Human civilization might be less like climbing a ladder and more like a wheel that keeps turning. Sometimes forward, sometimes back, but always moving. Always human. Always reaching for something higher, even knowing we might fall again. The question is, are we listening? So where does this whole thing actually begin? Not with ancient stones or flood myths or underwater cities. It starts with something much more specific. A shipwreck off the coast of a tiny Greek island in 1901, and a sponge diver who saw something impossible glinting in the sand. They called it the Antikythera mechanism. When they first pulled it up, it looked like a corroded lump of bronze, nothing special. But as researchers started studying it over the decades, they realized what they had. It was a machine. A computer, actually. Ancient Greek, dated to around 100 BCE, and it tracked the movements of the sun, moon, and planets with gear precision we couldn't replicate for over 1,000 years. Think about that for a second. This wasn't a simple astrolabe or a sundial. This was a device with over 30 interlocking bronze gears, engineered to predict eclipses, calculate the Olympic Games schedule, and model the irregular orbit of the moon. The level of astronomical knowledge required to build this was staggering. And the mechanical sophistication? We didn't see anything like it again until medieval clockmakers in Europe, more than a millennium later. The Antikythera mechanism did something uncomfortable to our timeline. We like to think of technology as this steady upward climb, right? Stone tools, then bronze, then iron, then steam engines, then computers. A nice, clean progression. But here was proof that it doesn't work that way. Knowledge can spike, then vanish. Entire branches of human capability can just disappear. And that raises the question that's been gnawing at people ever since. If the ancient Greeks could build this, what else could they do that we've forgotten? What else is buried under the sand or corroded beyond recognition? This is where Graham Hancock enters the story. In 1995, he published Fingerprints of the Gods, and it became a phenomenon. Millions of copies sold, translated into dozens of languages. And the core idea was simple, but provocative. What if there was an advanced civilization before recorded history? What if the megalithic sites, the flood myths, the ancient astronomical knowledge, what if they are all remnants of something we lost? Now, mainstream archaeology wasn't exactly thrilled with Hancock. They pointed out the speculative leaps, the cherry-picked evidence, the alternative interpretations that didn't hold up under scrutiny. And they had fair points. But here's the thing, Hancock did something important anyway. He made millions of people look at ancient sites and ask, wait, how did they actually do that? He made curiosity mainstream. And he wasn't working in a vacuum. The 1980s and 90s were this perfect cultural moment for these ideas. You had Indiana Jones making archaeology look like adventure and mystery. You had the X-Files teaching a generation to question official explanations. You had the History Channel pivoting from World War II documentaries to shows about ancient aliens and lost technologies. It was like the culture was primed for it. We wanted mysteries. We wanted to believe that the past was stranger and more interesting than the textbooks told us. And honestly, who can blame us? The official story, hunter-gatherers slowly figured out farming, then cities, then civilization. It is not exactly thrilling. But ancient advanced civilization lost to cataclysm. That's a story you cannot stop thinking about. There's something deeper going on here too. Psychologically, I mean. Humans are drawn to the idea that we are rediscovering rather than discovering. That we are remembering rather than inventing. There's a comfort in it, actually. It means we are part of a longer story. It means if humanity has fallen before and risen again, we are more resilient than we think. It also makes us feel less arrogant. Because let's be honest, modern civilization has this assumption that we are the peak, right? The most advanced, the most sophisticated, the smartest humans who ever lived. But if an ancient civilization could build the Antikythera mechanism, if they could move 1,000-ton stones and calculate planetary orbits, maybe we are not as special as we thought. Maybe we are just the latest chapter, not the final one. And here's where it gets interesting. This curiosity, this wondering about what came before, it is not actually new. It is ancient itself. Plato wrote about Atlantis as a civilization that existed 90 years before his time. The Sumerians wrote about the Anunnaki, those who from heaven came, as if remembering something older than themselves. Every culture has its golden age myth, its story of former glory. So maybe this isn't a modern obsession at all. Maybe every generation looks back and wonders if they are building on ruins they do not fully understand. Maybe the ancients themselves were asking the same questions about their ancients. The Antikythera mechanism sits in a museum in Athens now. You can go see it if you want, though honestly, it is hard to make out much detail through the corrosion. But that's almost fitting, isn't it? This object that changed how we think about the past is itself barely visible, requiring imagination to reconstruct. And that's what started this whole journey. One impossible object that forced us to reconsider everything. Because if that could exist, hidden in the Mediterranean for 2,000 years, what else is out there? What else are we walking past, buried under sand or sunk beneath waves, that would rewrite the story we tell about ourselves? The truth is, we do not know. And maybe that's okay. Maybe the not knowing is what keeps us looking. So we've talked about lost cities under the ocean, ancient stones that shouldn't exist, and civilizations that might have known more than we give them credit for. But there's one place we haven't really looked yet. One massive blind spot in our search for ancient evidence. And it has been sitting there the whole time, literally frozen in place. Antarctica. Now, I know what you are thinking. Antarctica? The continent that's been covered in ice for millions of years. That Antarctica? Yeah, that one. And here's where it gets interesting. See, Antarctica wasn't always the frozen wasteland it is today. About 34 million years ago, it was actually ice-free. It had forests, rivers, maybe even animals wandering around. But that was way before humans were even a thing, right? So why does it matter? Well, here's the thing. What if small areas of Antarctica were accessible more recently than that? What if during brief warming periods or along certain coastal regions, there were pockets of land that ancient people could have actually reached and lived on? And what if, when the ice came back, it buried everything they left behind? It sounds wild, but there's this map that's been driving researchers crazy for decades. It is called the Piri-Reis map, created in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral. And it shows the coast of South America in pretty good detail for the time. But here's the weird part. The bottom of the map appears to show a coastline that some people believe is Antarctica. Not the Antarctica we know today, covered in ice, but Antarctica as it might have looked with an ice-free coast. Now, mainstream historians will tell you it is probably just the coast of South America, drawn incorrectly, or maybe Patagonia stretched out weird. And they are probably right. But the map supposedly came from older source maps, some dating back to who knows when. And if it really does show an ice-free Antarctic coastline, well, someone had to have seen that coastline to map it. And the last time significant portions of Antarctica were ice-free was, let's just say, a very long time ago. Then there's Operation High Jump. In 1946, just after World War II, Admiral Richard Bard led a massive expedition to Antarctica. We are talking 700 men, 13 ships, and 33 aircraft. The official story was that it was a research expedition, training for cold weather operations. But here's where the conspiracy theories come in. Some people think they were looking for something. Nazi bases. Hidden entrances to underground civilizations. Ancient technology. Take your pick. Now, do I think they found a secret Nazi base? Probably not. But the scale of that operation for just research and training? It does make you wonder what they were really doing down there. What we do know for sure is that Antarctica is hiding things. Lots of things. Under all that ice, there are subglacial lakes. Lake Vostok is the biggest one we know about. It is roughly the size of Lake Ontario, and it has been sealed under more than 2 miles of ice for millions of years. In 2012, Russian scientists finally drilled through and found that it contains liquid water. An entire hidden ecosystem that's been cut off from the rest of the world. And Lake Vostok isn't alone. There are hundreds of these lakes under the ice. Entire environments we've barely begun to explore. Who knows what's down there? But here's the hard truth about Antarctica and our search for ancient civilizations. If anything was ever built there, we are probably never going to find it. 2 miles of ice doesn't just cover evidence. It crushes it. It grinds it. It obliterates it. Imagine the weight of that much ice pressing down on anything underneath. Stone structures would be pulverized. Wood would be powder. Any trace of habitation would be compressed into geological sediment. So if there was a civilization in Antarctica before the ice came, and that's a big if, the evidence is likely destroyed. Or at least so damaged and buried that we'll never recognize it for what it was. But here's where things get, let's call it complicated. Climate change is melting Antarctic ice. We can debate the causes and the solutions all day long, but the fact is, it is happening. The ice sheets are shrinking. Coastal areas are being exposed. And as uncomfortable as it is to say, this gives us an opportunity. For the first time in thousands of years, we are going to see parts of Antarctica that have been hidden. What will we find? Probably nothing. Probably just rocks and ice and frozen dirt. But maybe, just maybe, we'll find something that makes us rethink the timeline. A structure. A tool. Something that shouldn't be there. It is like Antarctica is a crime scene that's been locked in a freezer for 0 years. The evidence is preserved or destroyed, but either way, we cannot get to it yet. And when we finally do, it might tell a completely different story than the one we've been telling ourselves. The thing about Antarctica is that it represents the ultimate unknown. We've mapped the surfaces of Mars and the Moon better than we've mapped what's under the Antarctic ice. We've sent robots to other planets, but we still do not know what's 2 miles beneath our own South Pole. And maybe that's okay. Maybe some mysteries are supposed to take time. Maybe we are not ready yet for what we might find. Or maybe there's nothing to find at all, and Antarctica is just what it appears to be. A frozen continent at the bottom of the world, keeping its secrets for a little while longer. But I will tell you what keeps me up at night. It is not the idea that there might be ancient ruins under the ice. It is the idea that we'll melt all that ice, look around, and realize we destroyed a pristine environment just to find nothing. That the real treasure was the ice itself, and we threw it away chasing ghosts. So here's the question. If you could instantly melt all of Antarctica's ice and explore it safely, would you? What do you think you'd find? Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. But here's what's strange about that question. We are so focused on what ancient civilizations might have lost that we are not paying attention to what we are about to lose ourselves. Because right now, at this very moment, our entire civilization is balanced on the edge of a knife made of code and copper wire. And most of us have no idea how any of it works. Think about it. You are probably watching this on a device that you couldn't build if your life depended on it. You can use it, sure, but could you explain how the screen actually produces light? How the processor calculates? How the Wi-Fi signal finds its way through the air to reach you? Most of us couldn't. We've built a world on technology we do not understand. We are all just really good at pressing buttons. And that's fine, until it isn't. There's this event that happened in 1859 called the Carrington event. A massive solar flare hit Earth's magnetic field so hard that telegraph wires literally caught fire. Operators got electric shocks. The aurora borealis was visible as far south as the Caribbean. People could read newspapers at midnight by the light in the sky. It was the biggest geomagnetic storm in recorded history. Now, here's the uncomfortable part. If that happened today, we'd be in serious trouble. Power grids would fail across entire continents. Satellites would fry. The internet would go dark. Your phone would become a very expensive paperweight. And we are talking weeks, maybe months, to get critical systems back online. Some estimates say it could take years. The National Academy of Sciences did a study on this. They estimated that a Carrington-level event today would cause between $1 and $2 trillion in damage, just in the first year. And that's just the economic cost. We are not even talking about the social cost, the human cost, when supply chains collapse and hospitals cannot function and water treatment plants go offline. But you do not even need a solar flare for this. One well-placed electromagnetic pulse, either from a nuclear weapon detonated at high altitude or a directed EMP device, could do similar damage to a region. And unlike a solar storm, that's something humans can cause intentionally. Here's where it gets really interesting though. Let's say something like that happens. A solar storm, an EMP, even just a cascading failure of infrastructure that takes down the internet for good. What happens to everything we know? Because here's the thing. More and more of human knowledge exists only in digital form. Photos that used to be in albums are now on phones. Documents that used to be in filing cabinets are now in the cloud. Entire libraries have been digitized and the physical books thrown away. We are putting all our eggs in a very fragile basket made of ones and zeros. And I know what you are thinking. But there are backups, right? Sure. Until there aren't. Until the backups are on servers that need power. Until the backup data centers are hit by the same storm. Until the people who know how to restore those backups are scattered and cannot communicate because the phone networks are down. We've created a situation where we could lose more knowledge in a single day than the Library of Alexandria contained in its entire existence. But even if we somehow preserve the data, there's another problem. The skill loss. Your great-grandparents probably knew how to do a bunch of things that you've never even thought about. Start a fire without matches. Navigate by the stars. Preserve food without refrigeration. Build a shelter without power tools. These weren't special skills, they were just life. Now think about what you know how to do without technology. And I mean, really do, not just I watched a YouTube video once. Could you grow enough food to feed yourself? Purify water? Make basic medicine? Fix things when they break? Most of us couldn't. We've outsourced all of that to systems we do not understand, run by specialists we've never met, powered by infrastructure we cannot see. There's this thing archaeologists talk about called the Bronze Age collapse. Around 1200 BCE, nearly every major civilization in the Mediterranean region fell within about 50 years. The Hittites, the Mycenaeans, the whole complex trade network that had existed for centuries just stopped. And for the next few hundred years, Greece didn't even have written language anymore. They forgot how to write. That's not ancient history being weird. That's what happens when civilizations become too complex and interconnected. When everything depends on everything else, one failure cascades into total collapse. And the more specialized people become, the more knowledge gets siloed in expert minds that do not survive the collapse. We are more specialized now than we've ever been. More interconnected than we've ever been. Which means we are more vulnerable than we've ever been. Here's the really wild thought. What if a collapse of our civilization would be more complete than any collapse before? Because ancient peoples at least knew how to survive without their technology. They knew how to farm, hunt, build, make fire. If everything fell apart, they still had the basics. If our everything fell apart, millions of people wouldn't know where to start. Now, I am not trying to be doom and gloom here. Because some people are thinking about this. There are organizations that are taking preservation seriously. You've got the Svalbard Global Seed Vault in Norway, this incredible facility buried in a mountain in the Arctic, storing seeds from every crop variety we can find. It is like a backup drive for agriculture, designed to survive pretty much anything. There's the Memory of Mankind project in Austria, storing information on ceramic tablets that'll last thousands of years, specifically designed to be readable, even if all our technology disappears. The Internet Archive is backing up the web. The Long Now Foundation is thinking about how to preserve knowledge across millennia. There are people trying to keep the knowledge of how to actually make things, not just use things. But here's what keeps me up at night. We are moving faster than we are backing up. We are creating new technology faster than we are understanding the old technology. We are building higher and higher on a foundation that fewer and fewer people know how to maintain. And unlike ancient civilizations that rose and fell over centuries, ours could fall in days. One solar storm. One cyber attack on critical infrastructure. One cascading failure. The question isn't whether we are advanced enough to survive. It is whether we are too advanced to survive. Whether we've built something so complex, so fragile, that it can only exist in perfect conditions. Like an orchid that dies the moment you take it out of the greenhouse. Maybe that's the pattern. Maybe civilizations do not fall because they are primitive. Maybe they fall because they are advanced. Because they reach a point where everything is so interconnected, so dependent on specialized knowledge and delicate systems, that one good shock brings it all down. And then, generations later, people look at the ruins and think, how did they do that? Not realizing that the people who built it were asking the same thing about whoever came before them. So maybe the real question isn't, were the ancients more advanced than we think? Maybe it is, are we more fragile than we realize? And maybe that's the real question we should be asking ourselves right now. Not just whether there was an advanced civilization before us, but what future archaeologists will think when they dig through your ruins. Because here's the thing, we are creating our own geological layer right now. This very moment. Archaeologists call it the Anthropocene, and it is unlike anything that's come before. Imagine you are an archaeologist 10,000 years from now, digging down through the earth. You'd see layers of sediment marking different eras, maybe some ash from an ancient volcano, some clay from a flood. And then suddenly, you'd hit this bizarre stratum of plastic, concrete, and radioactive isotopes that appears all at once across the entire planet. You'd have to wonder, what kind of creatures made this? They'd find traces of us everywhere. In the soil, in the rocks, even in the bones of animals that lived during our time. We fundamentally changed the chemistry of the planet. Those future archaeologists would see the spike in carbon dioxide preserved in ice cores. They'd see the layer of microplastics distributed across every ocean floor. They'd find isotopes from nuclear testing in tree rings and coral reefs. We are not just living on Earth. We are writing our story into its very structure. But here's what's humbling. Most of what we've built will not make it. Those glass skyscrapers in Manhattan, gone in a few thousand years, just rust stains and glass dust. Your house? Maybe a few foundation stones if you are lucky. Even most of our massive infrastructure will crumble. Bridges collapse, roads crack and get buried, cities made of steel and concrete will oxidize and erode. So what will last? Probably Mount Rushmore. Those carved faces might survive for tens of thousands of years if they are not worn down by weather. The Hoover Dam could last a good long while, until the Colorado River eventually breaks through. Maybe some of our tunnels and underground structures. But beyond that, not much. The pyramids have lasted 5,000 years and they are already pretty beaten up. Now imagine 50,000 years. 100,000. And the really strange part is, we know this. We've tried to leave messages for the future, knowing how fragile our moment is. Remember the Georgia Guidestones? That granite monument in Georgia, with instructions carved in 8 languages, things like maintain humanity under 500 million and balance personal rights with social duties. It stood there for decades as a kind of message to whoever might come next. Then it was destroyed in 2022. Couldn't even last 50 years. If that's how we treat our own attempts at permanence, what hope does anything else have? Or think about the Voyager Golden Record, those gold-plated discs we launched into space in 1977, carrying sounds and images from Earth. Music, greetings in 55 languages, pictures of humans and nature. We sent them out thinking maybe aliens would find them someday. But here's another way to think about it. Maybe they are for us. For whatever humans might exist a million years from now, as a reminder that we were here, we tried to say something meaningful. We wanted to be remembered. Because there's something deeply human about wanting to leave a mark, isn't there? We carve our initials in trees. We write "I was here" on walls. We build monuments and write books. We do not want to be forgotten. And I think that's because somewhere deep down, we understand how easily we could be forgotten. If our civilization collapsed tomorrow, really collapsed, I mean, power grids down, supply chains broken, cities abandoned, how long would it take before most evidence of us disappeared? 1,000 years? 5,000? 10,000 years of weathering, erosion, vegetation overgrowth, and maybe rising seas, and future archaeologists might only find scattered traces. Strange refined metals. Odd concentrations of plastic compounds. Radioactive signatures in the rock. They'd know something happened, but would they understand what? And that brings us back to where we started, doesn't it? Maybe we are not the first civilization to reach this height. Maybe others rose before us, built their own version of skyscrapers and highways, felt just as permanent and important as we do. And then something happened. The climate shifted, a comet hit, they destroyed themselves, or maybe they just faded gradually as resources ran out. And 12,000 years later, almost everything they built was gone, recycled by the earth into new soil and stone. It is a humbling thought. Maybe even a scary one. But I think there's something else in it too, something almost hopeful. Because if civilizations have risen and fallen before, that means humanity is resilient. We are survivors. We've endured ice ages and floods, catastrophes and collapses. We've lost knowledge and gained it back. We've forgotten how to do things and then relearned them. And we are still here, still building, still curious, still reaching. So maybe the real question isn't, were they more advanced than us? Maybe it is, what can we learn from the cycle? If other civilizations fell because they pushed too hard, consumed too much, grew too arrogant, well, we've got the same warning signs flashing right now. Climate change, resource depletion, weapons that could end everything. We are standing at the same crossroads they might have faced. But here's the thing. We know about those crossroads now. We can see the pattern. We've dug up the ruins, read the myths, studied the geological layers. We have the chance to be the generation that actually learns from the past, even if that past is older and stranger than we were taught in school. Maybe we are the ones who finally break the cycle. Maybe we are the civilization that figures out how to last, how to balance technology with wisdom, progress with sustainability, ambition with caution. Maybe we are the ones who leave behind, not just plastic and concrete, but knowledge preserved deliberately, seeds stored safely, instructions for those who come after us that actually help. Or maybe we are just another chapter in a very long book, another archaeological layer waiting to happen. Another group of clever apes who reached high, built amazing things, and then faded back into the earth. I do not know which it'll be. Nobody does. But I think there's something powerful in asking the question. In looking at ancient ruins and thinking, could that be us someday? Because when you really sit with that thought, it changes how you see everything. The things we build, the choices we make, the knowledge we preserve or let slip away. So why cannot we stop wondering about this? Why does every generation, every culture, come back to this idea of a lost, advanced civilization? I think it is because the question itself touches something fundamental in us. It is not really about ancient stones or flooded cities or mysterious maps. It is about us, about what it means to be human, here, now, carrying forward something we didn't start and will not finish. There's comfort in the lost civilization story. If humanity has risen before, fallen before, and risen again, then we are part of a larger pattern. We are not alone in our struggles. The challenges we face, climate change, technological risk, the weight of maintaining what we've built, maybe they are not unique to us. Maybe they are just part of the cycle. And if others survived catastrophes and rebuilt, perhaps we can too. But I think there's something deeper happening here. This fascination says we want our lives to mean something beyond our individual existence. We want to be part of a story that stretches back further than recorded history and forward into a future we'll never see. When you stand in front of a massive stone block at Baalbek, or look out at the ocean knowing there might be cities beneath those waves, you feel it. That sense of continuity. That whisper of connection. And honestly, that's what makes us better. This question, this wondering, it pushes archaeology forward. It makes scientists look in places they wouldn't have looked otherwise. Underwater sites, under ice, in overlooked corners of the world. It forces us to question our assumptions about what people in the past were capable of. Every time someone says they couldn't have done that, someone else shows up with evidence that maybe they could. The uncertainty itself has value. Maybe not knowing for sure is exactly what keeps us exploring. If we prove tomorrow that there definitely was an advanced Ice Age civilization, we'd catalog it, study it, and move on. If we prove definitively there wasn't, we'd close the book and stop looking. But the mystery, the possibility, that keeps us curious. That keeps us digging, literally and figuratively. Because here's what I have realized going through all of this. The real treasure isn't proving anything. It is the reminder that we are all temporary custodians. You, me, everyone watching this. We are all holding on to human knowledge for just a brief moment before passing it forward. Every teacher who shares what they know, every book that gets preserved, every skill that gets taught to the next generation, That's us being custodians. And that's a profound responsibility. Think about the Library of Alexandria, lost in flames. Think about the Mayan codices, destroyed because they seemed threatening. Think about Roman concrete, Greek fire, all those techniques and technologies we let slip away because we thought we'd always have time to remember later. We didn't. And now we are scrambling to rediscover what our ancestors knew. So when we look at the possibility of a lost civilization, we are really looking at a mirror. We are asking, could this happen to us? Will future generations look at our ruins and wonder how we built these things? Will they tell stories about our golden age, the way we tell stories about Atlantis? It is entirely possible. More than possible. If the wrong catastrophe hits, a solar flare, a pandemic we cannot stop, a climate cascade we cannot reverse, so much of what we know could vanish. And unlike our ancestors, we've stored everything digitally. Paper degrades, yes, but it lasts centuries. A hard drive without power? Dead in years. The cloud? Only exists as long as the servers do. But here's the hopeful part. Knowing this makes us more careful. Organizations are building seed vaults, archiving knowledge in multiple formats, teaching old skills alongside new ones. We are thinking about preservation in ways previous generations didn't have to, because we understand how fragile it all is. And maybe that's the ultimate lesson from wondering about lost civilizations. Not that they definitely existed or definitely didn't, but that the wondering itself teaches us to be humble. Humble about what we know, curious about what we do not, and careful with what we build. Because whether there was an advanced Ice Age civilization or not, we know for certain there's an advanced civilization right now. Ours. And what we do with it matters. The choices we make about technology, about the environment, about what knowledge we preserve and pass forward, those choices echo into a future we cannot see. That's why people keep searching underwater ruins. That's why they keep measuring ancient temples and studying old myths. That's why, after 14 parts of this, you are still here, still listening. Because this question connects us to something bigger than ourselves. It makes us think about time in scales that dwarf our individual lives. It reminds us that we are part of a human story that's been going on for far longer than we usually consider, and will hopefully continue long after we are gone. So the next time you see an ancient structure, or hear a myth about a great flood, or read about some mysterious artifact that shouldn't exist, let yourself wonder. Let yourself feel that connection across time. Not because you need to prove anything or solve anything, but because the wondering itself is beautiful. It is human. It is what we do. We look at the past and see mysteries. We look at the future and see possibilities. And we stand here in the present, temporary custodians of everything humanity has learned, trying our best to understand where we came from and be worthy of where we might go. That's the real answer to what if there was a civilization more advanced than ours. The answer is, maybe there was, maybe there wasn't, but asking the question makes us better either way. It keeps us humble, keeps us curious, keeps us connected to the long, strange, beautiful story of being human on this planet. And that's worth wondering about.